The first thing you would need to do is go to voidlinux.org and go to the download section over here. Now I'm going to be installing the glibc version, but I believe most of the steps can be taken for the musl version as well. Hit this live image link and it's going to download. I already have the ISO, so I'm going to cancel that, but let yours download. Next, you need to verify. I assume you know how to verify. Just read the instructions on how to verify your ISO if you don't. Next, instructions to install are provided in the Void handbook. So if you need a written, well, text to refer while I show you how to install, you can always go here. And this is a written document. Oh, wait, here under advanced installation guide, installation via Chroot. This is a installation guide in written of what I'm going to show you. What you would need to do is burn that ISO to a USB, or if you're using a hypervisor for virtual machines, well, start that up and give your ISO as a option. I'm assuming you know how to do that. I'm going to be using QEMU and KVM as my hypervisor. So all I need to do is run this script with the ISO, and it's going to bring up this, which is my boot entry. So if you're installing this on hardware, you're going to need to burn it onto the USB, shut down your computer, restart it, like switch it on again, and then get into your BIOS. I assume you know how to do that, spamming F9, 10, 11, and I think on some Dell computers it's escape. So get into your BIOS, select your USB to boot off of, and select void Linux. And we're gonna wait for it to boot for a second. Okay, and I'm gonna log in as a root, which is the user, and the password is void Linux. Okay, so the first thing I'm gonna do is set my font to something bigger because it is tiny. So we can cd into USR share KBD console fonts, and if we ls over here, we can see there's a number of fonts. I'm just going to choose the biggest one. You can set your font with set font lat grk cry 12x22, which stands for, I believe, Latin Cyrillic. I'm not very sure. So there we go. That's a much bigger font. Now, the next thing I want to do is install bash, because if you echo our shell by default, it's /bin/sh. And this is not really a very friendly shell to work with when you're installing with Chroot. Because if I try to tab complete file names, it just gives me a normal tab and it doesn't, well, show you file names to complete. That's annoying. Also, if we hit the up arrow, it just gives us the escape sequence and not the previous command like bash would. And there are going to be some repetitive commands that we're going to have to type in, so the up arrow is going to be very helpful. So let's install bash. Xbps install -s bash. The S syncs with remote repositories. Okay, so in this case, xbps itself must be updated. So xbps install -u xbps. Hit yes. Okay, and now we can do xbps install bash. You can install zsh as well if you're more comfortable with that, I guess. Now we can launch into bash, and you can see our command prompt changed. Okay, so the first thing we have to do is figure out whether we have a BIOS booted computer or a UEFI booted computer. And the way you do that is you ls, so list the sys firmware /EFI. Now, if this gives you an error like file or directory not found, it means that you are booted in BIOS mode. So I'm booted in BIOS mode because there is no such file or directory. However, if this command gives you some output, it means you're booted in UEFI. This is important because it's going to determine our partition tables and how we partition and format and mount our drive. So I'm going to show you both how you would do it if you had a UEFI computer and how you would do it if you had a BIOS computer. So I have a BIOS computer, but I'm going to first show you how you're going to do this on a UEFI computer. So let's run lsblk and we shall see that our hard drive is 4 gigabytes in size. It's SDA. So the first thing we need to do is partition it. So cfdisk /dev sda. Now for the partition table, I'm going to keep it brief. If you have a UEFI computer, you would choose GPT, and that's what I'm showing you how to do it on a UEFI. So let's select GPT. Now, since my virtual machine isn't actually a UEFI booted computer, it's going to give you some error. It's going to give me some errors. But if you have a UEFI computer, it should not give you any errors. So select GPT, hit new. 512 megabytes should be enough. This is going to become, yeah, you can see that we have some errors. Don't worry about it. This is going to become our EFI system partition. So then scroll over to type, and then at the very top you can see EFI system. Select that. Next, go down here, hit new, give it the rest of the space. That's fine. And this is fine to be a Linux partition. So we write that, type yes, and then we quit. Let's just clear the screen. Now if we run lsblk, you can see that we have two partitions, dev sda1 and then dev sda2. So now what we need to do is format both the drives. So first we're going to format dev sda1. So this has to be a vfat formatted drive partition. So mkfs.vfat /dev sda1 is the command. So that's it, very easy. And for dev sda2, you can format it ext4 or I guess butterfs xfs. If you know how to do that, go ahead, but I'm going to be formatting it ext4, and it's going to take a while and it's done. So let's just run lsblk again. Now we have to mount our partitions. So I'm going to use /mnt as the mount point. You can use any folder, but the convention is /mnt, so I'm just going to do it there. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is mount our root partition, which is dev sda2 to mnt. And you can see it's mounted to -mnt. Now, what you're going to want to do is you need to create a mount point for your EFI system partition. So we're going to do that. mkdir/p mount boot EFI. So this is going to create our mount point folder for dev sda1. So just run that, and now mount dev sda1 on /mount boot and EFI. Run an lsblk to check, and you can see that it's mounted in the correct place. Now I will say, do not mount your SDA1 before you mount your root partition, which is SDA2. I've done that before by mistake, and it has disastrous consequences. So please don't do that. So that's how you would do it on a UEFI system. Now, I don't have a UEFI system. As you saw, my output for the ls command had, well, no output, right? It had only an error. So I need to partition it for BIOS. So cfdisk -z. The Z flag just allows me to choose the partition table again, /dev sda, and we come back to the partition table. Now, if you have a BIOS booted computer or virtual machine, you would choose DOS. You can choose GPT, but I believe it's not recommended, so you should choose DOS. This is the MBR partition table scheme thing. So hit DOS, and you shall see once again free space. Create, I guess, another 512 megabyte. This is going to be a boot partition. Now, Void Linux doesn't by default recommend boot partitions, I believe, because older versions of kernels are not removed when they're updated. But that is something we can handle later. So hit primary. So that's going to be our boot partition. This can be a Linux. This can be an ID as Linux. That's fine. Next, this is going to be our root partition. Primary. Yeah, that's fine. Write it. Yes. Uh, Quit. And if we run ls, oh god, they're still mounted. Forgot to unmount them. Okay, I think there's still. You know what? It's fine. Let's just double check. I forgot to unmount it. Yeah, it's still a DOS label. That's fine. Phew. Okay, so now we have two partitions, and the first thing you're going to need to do is format them again. Now, you can format, if it's a BIOS computer, you can format both your boot and root partition to be ext4. So let's do that. mkfs.ext4. I misspelled mkfs. .ext4 slash dev sta1. And same thing with sta2. Okay, now we need to mount our partitions. So we're going to mount the root partition sta2 to slash mnt. Next, we're going to mount our boot partition. Oh wait, first we need to create the mount point for the boot partition. So mkdir mount boot. Okay, now we need to mount dev sta1 to the boot point we just created. So slash mnt boot. And if you lsblk, you can see that it's well mounted on the correct places. Once again, don't mount your boot partition after you mount your root, before you mount your root partition, because that's going to have bad consequences. Okay, so now that this is done, we are going to need to install our system. This is the Fstab part in the Arch install, if you're familiar with that, but we're going to be using xbps. Now, there is a there are some warnings on the Void Linux page. If you are on a ARch64 architecture, you need to install a kernel package with the base system package, and also you need to use a appropriate URL for the type of system you want to install. So if you click on this link, it's going to give you all these sub repositories. So basically, I'm installing a glibc version. So what I'm going to do is save my URL mirror to a shell variable. So let's do that. Repo equals https colon slash 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 alpha dot de dot repo dot void linux dot org slash current. So if you're installing glibc, you would do slash current, but if you're installing musl, for example, you would just do it like that, slash musl. Yeah, like this. And of course, if you're doing it on arch and arch64 musl, you would do it with arch64. So I'm not doing with that, I'm just doing with glibc. So I'm just gonna, this is enough, and it's saved. Next, you're going to need to actually Fstab as or the Fstab step. So we're going to use xbps install. Okay, first of all, we need to specify the architecture. So the command is xbps arch. So we're going, this is the architecture, and I'm on a 64-bit computer, so x86 underscore 64. You are most probably also on a 64-bit computer, but if you're on another architecture, just specify that in these. and the command is xbps install the -s to sync to the repositories, the R flag, which points to the root directory. So that's going to be our /mnt. The capital R to specify the repo, which we have saved as the shell variable repo. So we can just put that in there. And the name of the package. So base system. And hit enter. It's going to update the repositories. And it's going to ask you to, import the RSA keys. You normally you would confirm this, but I'm in a virtual machine and I don't really care, so I'm just gonna hit yes and yes again. Now it's gonna take a while to install, and while it's installing, let's talk about why you would want to do something like this. Void Linux has a perfectly nice ncurses install, so why would you do or go through the effort of doing something like this? The truth is, it could be for multiple reasons. I once had a computer that was UEFI booted in legacy mode, and for whatever reason, it just wouldn't boot if I set it to normal UEFI. I never figured that out. It would only boot in UEFI legacy mode. Now, if I use the normal ncurses void installer, what would happen is I would, try to install it, but the installation would yell at me saying, "Hey, you can't install. You're on a UEFI system, and there's no EFI system partition." And I'm just thinking, but I'm booting in legacy mode, so the EFI system partition is not going to mean anything. And it wouldn't let me install it that way. So that's why I needed to do a Chroot installation. Apart from that, maybe you want to get away from systemd for whatever reason. Maybe you're a systemd hater, but you are also elitist and you want to do a Chroot installation because that's what you did for Arch, and you don't want your friends making fun of you because you used an installation guide or something like that. I don't know. You still want to run it, so you're doing this. Listen, I have no idea, but maybe that's why you did it. I'm just going to wait for this to finish installing now and cut back when it does. Right, and it's done. That was extremely fast. XBPS is a fast package manager. Okay, next we need to enter our Chroot. Now, to actually enter our Chroot, you need some pseudo file systems for that to work. So let's just clear the screen here. We need to mount our pseudo file systems. So mount rbind /sys to /mount sys, and then two ampersands, and then mount make r slave to /mount/sys. Now, rbind, I believe, stands for you can mount a subtree and all its submounts to another location. And make r slave, the manual page on mount isn't too clear on what that is, but I believe it just makes /mnt your root. I'm not exactly sure. The actual documentation is hidden in kernel source tree, so I'm not going to look at that. Now, this is where you can hit the up arrow and thank yourself you installed bash, or curse yourself that you didn't. But basically, we're going to replace all the sys with dev, because that's the next pseudo file system that you need. Slash, oops, dev. There we go. Next, it's proc. Just replace all the dev with proc. You get the idea. We've mounted all your pseudo file systems. We need to copy our resolve.conf from etc resolve.conf to our Chroot place. And after this, we can Chroot into our new installation. So let's give ourselves a temporary ps1 variable so we can know when we are in the Chroot, and the # because we are root, and then the actual command. So change root to /mnt with the shell bin bash. There we go. There are going to be some configuration files we need to edit. So we're going to need an editor. By default, VI is installed. So right here, but I know a lot of people aren't very comfortable with VI. So what you can do is xbps install whatever editor you want. So as Vim for me, because I want Vim. You can install Nano or any other terminal based editor if you want. So Vim is installed. So the first file we're going to have to edit is etc hostname. Here we go. I'm just going to call this void box test thing, or maybe just void box is fine. Okay. The next thing we're going to have to do is go through the options in rc.conf. Now, the thing with this is you don't really need to do it now, but you can. So you can skip this step entirely. So if you do to etcrc.conf, there's a bunch of options here. Now, the host name, they say you should specify it in etc hostname, which we have done. So you can ignore that. The hardware clock, you can leave it. By default, it's good enough. Next, your time zone is going to be set in etc local time, which is what we're going to be doing next. Now your key map. Your key map by default, I believe it's en just English. So what you can do is you can list user share kbbd key maps for examples, and I forgot, I believe this i386. There you go. And I have a QWERTY keyboard. My god. QWERTY. There we go. There you go. There's your key maps. So I believe en. Where's en? It's not en. It's us, isn't it? Yeah, us. So let's go back to etcrc.conf and let's just change the key map to a US key map. And now this is the font. Now by default, this font that we have over here is not going to stay. It's going to go back to those old fonts when we reboot, and I don't want that, so I'm going to change it over here. I believe it was lat grk cyr 12x22. Hopefully it doesn't error out. And the rest of this stuff is, I don't think it's important, but hey, whatever. You can change that if you want, so wished to. The next thing we're going to be doing is obviously going and changing our time zone. So that's done with ln sf. What was it? User share zone info Asia, was it? Yeah, Asia. And for me it's going to be Calcutta, but you get the idea. Just find out where your time zone is and then set it to etc local time. That's done. Now the next thing, if you are on glibc, I believe on muscle you don't need to do this, but you're going to be generating a locale. So we're going to have to edit etc default libc locales. Now the only locale I'm going to use is enus, so that one. There we go. Now we need to generate our locale, so xbps, that's done with this command. Reconfigure f glibc locales, and you can see that's generating the locales, and it's generated it successfully. Okay, so we're very near, I guess nearing the end. We're going to have to set a root password, so set that. Use a good password because it's your root, especially if you're installing on hardware. Now This is the last major step, which is your Fstab. Now you need to copy, initially you need to copy from proc mounts to your etc Fstab. Now let's actually vim into the etc Fstab because there's some editing we have to do here. Now what we really need are these first two lines, the dev sta1 and 2. We actually don't need the rest of this, so let's delete it, right? And another thing is, you shouldn't really use. So what your Fstab actually does is it configures how fsck and where your partitions are going to be mounted when your OS is actually booting. So it's an incredibly important file. And the thing is, if you have it like with the names SDA1 and SDA2, then in case something gets corrupted, the new names that will be assigned to your drives are going to cause chaos to your system, because something that's not your boot partition can be renamed to SDA1. Or if sometimes if you plug in a pen drive and then boot, your pen drive could be labeled as SDA1, and that's just going to throw everything into the mix. So what you really want to do is use the UUIDs for these drives to boot them so that it boots only those drives specifically every time. Now you do that with the command blkid. Now by default, if you run it, it's going to give you some errors, and it's going to give you all the UUIDs of all the partitions. Now what you need to do is redirect it to etc fstab. It's going to give you the errors again, don't worry about it. Now edit Fstab again. Now what you really need is just these last two, SDA1 and SDA2, and really you just need this UUID. So let's we can remove these three lines because we don't need them, and let's do some mild editing here. Let's just keep a space here. Let's remove this and remove this. Next, we need to copy over this UUID and then paste it here. And same with SDA2. Copy this UUID, paste it, and that's good. And now after you remove those UUIDs, you can remove these two lines. They're not really needed. Now there's a few more things we still have to do in HCFS So of your root partition, all right, if you have an EFI, your boot is probably going to say VFAT over here, and it's yeah, that's basically it. Instead of ext4, you don't need to worry about that. Everything is normal. What we need to do is configure these two numbers, or really this last number at the end, because that's going to configure how fsck works. So for your root partition, which is just the /, you're going to want to set that last number to 1. So it should be 0 and 1. Same thing for your boot, except you're going to set it to 2. Now you're going to need to mount your /tmp inside your RAM in the same file. So let's do that. tmpfs /tmp tmpfs defaults no suid no dev. Oops, that's not the no dev. There we go. And then a 0 0 should be good. Now by default, this is not well there in any of the things, so you need to write this down by yourself. Once again, check your wait, that's the wrong page. Yeah, check the specific, well, the void linux installation guide. If you need the specific commands, it's down here somewhere. Yeah, this one. Now as you can see, they said use a swap partition. Now I haven't done a swap partition, mostly because I feel most of the cases it's unnecessary. But if you know how to, if you want to swap partition, you can just read the manual. I'm not going to go into swap partitions. I don't think they're really that useful anyway, because how fast is your how fast is your hard disk or even SSD going to be compared to RAM? All right, so let's write that. Now, what we need to do is install grub. Now, there's once again two ways we can do this depending on the UEFI or BIOS computer. Now, it's different for each. I'm going to show UEFI first. So what you would need to do is xbps install. We need to install grub, and then your architecture goes here. So if it was ARch, then if it was ARM, then you go ARM 64 EFI, like that. But I'm using an x86 computer, so x86 64-bit, and then EFI like this. Obviously, I'm not going to install it. I don't have an EFI computer, but just let that install. Next, you're going to have to run grub install, and then you have to specify the target. Put that equal to x86 underscore 64 hyphen EFI. Then EFI directory, and you need to specify your EFI system partition mount point. So that's going to be boot and then EFI, like that. And the last option, bootloader hyphen ID equals, you can set this to void capital V, why not? Now run this command. It should give you errors if you've made a mistake, and if not, go back and then do it correctly, I guess. Now I am on a BIOS computer, so I don't need to install grub EFI. So I just need to do xbps install -s grub. Yes, hit yes. That's going to take a minute. Right, now we do grub install /dev sta. Now don't specify sta1, your boot partition, or your root partition sta2, just dev sta. And it's going to install, and it's going to say installation finished, no error reported. That means your grub is installed. Lastly, we need to reconfigure it, reconfigure all your packages to make sure that they are working correctly. This will also generate your init ramfs and your grub configuration file. So xbps reconfigure -fa. It's just going to go through all your packages, and it's going to generate your init ramfs. There we go. And it's going to generate your grub config file as well. It's going to take a second. There we go. And that's done. Now we are almost done. We need to exit out of our that's not exit out of our Chroot, and now we can shut down our now. At this point, after it shuts down, now obviously QEMU is going to boot it right back up, so I need to boot it without the ISO file. But basically at this point, you're going to have to remove your USB after you shut it down and then power it on again. Now all I need to do is remove this, stop my virtual machine, write this, and then void test, and you can see we get our grub bootloader screen with void gnu/linux over here. Hit enter, and it's going to load up your kernel. And over here we only have our root user for now, so log in as root, and the password you set, hope you remember it because I nearly thought I forgot. Now we are in dash over here, so if you echo shell vestal bin sh, so launch up bash if you want. So we're done, right? Well, here it is, it's booted and everything. So let's install neofetch and get our lives done with. Shall we? We can brag now. Hit yes. What's this? Transaction failed. Transient resolver failure. What does that mean? Now, If you installed by the ncurses menu, your internet basically would have been taken care of. But since we installed by Chroot, we need to do that ourselves. And for that is symbolically linking etc sv dh. Alright, should have explained. ln is the command to link, and we're symbolically linking with an s flag, and f just to force it. etc sv dhcpcd. So this is the default resolver, I believe, and we can just link that to var service. And now if we pgrep dhcpcd, we can see that it's running as a PID 618. So now if we ping, let's say 1.1.1.1, actually let's ping void linux, you can see that it actually pings. Now we can do an xbps install. Now it's recommended you update your system. Now usually there's nothing to update. Yeah, you can see there's nothing to update because we installed with a Chroot, and even if you were installing from the menu, you probably installed with network. So xbps install hyphen s neofetch. Let's install neofetch. Why not? Hit yes. This is the most important package. And now if you run a neofetch, everything is working just fine. So I might do a how to set up a graphical environment and users and whatnot, but I don't think I will. It's been done hundreds of times before. I want I want mostly original content and not, well, anything else. So I guess that's it. Thank you for watching.